Hello, everybody, and welcome to this virtual session. Today, we're going to talk about gender transformative health programming. We're going to look at emerging best practices and common approaches. As we all know, the intersection of health, human rights, and social justice is now well recognized in the global health sector, and it's increasingly being reflected in the work of Canadian partners. Over the past years, and in particular, since the introduction of the Feminist International Assistance Policy, CanWatch members have driven forward sector innovation and best practice in gender transformative health programming. While missions and mandates of members are wildly diverse, there are important common threads that have emerged which characterize those women's and children's health initiatives that seek to transform the root causes of inequality, what we would refer to as gender transformative programming. So today we're inviting participants to listen in on a bit of a discussion about three distinct initiatives. One is a conceptual model for transformative nutrition programming. Another is a gender transformative 5-country health program. And finally, a virtual capacity building initiative, CanWatch's gender equality training modules. We'll be exploring how these distinct pieces all bear the hallmarks of transformative programming in a couple of different ways. A consultative and evidence-based design, a rights-based and holistic approach that puts the individual at the center, and the inherent challenges of working towards generating social change. The discussion will be an exploration in which each of us will share a unique perspective and will introduce the gender transformative elements of our respective initiatives. I'll invite my colleagues, Saif and Merydth, to introduce themselves first, and then we'll each do a short presentation on the pieces we're bringing to the discussion before we launch into some questions. Merydth?
Hi, my name is Merydth Holte-McKenzie. I'm the Senior Gender Equality Advisor at World Vision Canada.
Hi, my name is Saifullah Chaudhry. I'm Senior Gender Equality Advisor with Plan International Canada.
And I'm Jen Donville. I'm an independent consultant and the designer and facilitator for CanWatch's gender equality training modules. So Merydth, I'll hand it over to you to introduce your initiative.
Thanks very much, Jen. So I'm really pleased today to share with you a gender transformative framework for nutrition. The project's been in the works for close to 2 years and was recently launched in December 2020. In the early days, our conversation started out broadly to explore the relationship between gender equality and nutrition, and we recognized quickly that there was a need for a conceptual framework that describes the complexity of nutrition with an integrated gender equality and women's empowerment lens. So with that in mind, a coalition was formed in March 2020, comprising of World Vision Canada, Save the Children Canada, Nutrition International, Action Against Hunger Canada, Breer Research Institute, Care Canada, and Mother Food International, and with the support and input from Global Affairs Canada. The coalition has developed a conceptual framework that we call the Gender Transformative Framework for Nutrition, or the GTFN, and I'll be sharing with you this model today. Now that we've developed the GTFN, our main purpose as a coalition is to present and to promote it and its use in both programming and research. And our goal is to ensure that it continues to be evidence-informed and beneficial for programming in a humanitarian response and endorsed by major global nutrition bodies. And my hope today is to share enough of the framework with you so that you have an idea of the gap that we saw and continue to see and the way that the framework, we hope, will address this gap. So proudly, as I mentioned, that this is a Canadian-led intervention involving some major players in global nutrition. This was a major undertaking. Over the course of a year, we ran an abstract review of over 1,000 articles to select those that describe studies specifically exploring gender and nutrition. Only 41 articles fit the inclusion criteria. We used the UNICEF framework for nutrition, for malnutrition, on the causes of undernutrition that was developed in the early 90s to organize the findings. And because the UNICEF framework identifies the immediate and underlying and basic causes of malnutrition and recognizes the multi-sectoral dimension of it, it provided a solid foundation from which to unpack the different domains of malnutrition while considering the complexity of empowerment and gender norms. But we wrestled with the linear nature of the UNICEF framework because we felt it was too limiting for how interrelated the different domains were. And so ultimately we landed on a more circular model with multiple rings that intersect with one another. We think that this reframing will help us to understand how gender norms, institutions, and power relations are disempowering women and girls and causing unequal access to food and health and nutrition services, education, agricultural resources, markets, and technologies, among other things. It can also help to identify entry points to address the complex and gendered interactions between the many drivers of malnutrition. So this innovative framework then helps practitioners and policymakers to identify evidence-based interventions, tools, and approaches for the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of gender transformative nutrition programming. But what we feel really distinguishes the GTFN from existing approaches is that it simultaneously describes the interactions across delivery systems and at the same time recognizes the complex relationships between individuals, households, and society, all of which impact gender equality and nutrition. So I'm going to unpack the framework a little bit, and we're going to look first at its core. And at its core, the framework has an understanding that agency, resources, and opportunity structure are fundamentally linked and interact to influence the degree to which women and girls will experience empowerment across all areas of their lives. Within the GTFN, these are expressed as empowerment circles. At the center of the framework is the concept of agency, or the ability to define one's goals and act on them. Agency is most often thought of as decision-making power, but it also includes the ability to negotiate, influence, or exert control over one's life. In order to be able to act, women and girls must also have the necessary resources to do this. To do so, and this can be everything from financial assets and material wealth to essential infrastructure, information, time and labor, mobility, and bodily integrity. It is possible for women to have the capacities above, yet find themselves constrained by the opportunity structure around them. And they'd be unable to act towards their intended goals. So the opportunity structure refers to the presence and operation of formal and informal institutions, laws, regulatory frameworks, and norms governing behavior that affect women and girls' agency and access to resources. Women's empowerment occurs when each of these elements are activated and mutually reinforcing. So then the outer ring consists of 7 multi-sectoral domains. The central placement of the empowerment circles enables users to do 3 things. First, to understand the systemic impacts of gender inequality within each of these domains. Secondly, to identify the interaction between the domains that contribute to malnutrition among women and girls, and to identify the entry points for action that harness agency, resources, and opportunity structure to drive large-scale and enduring change. Focusing on single domains or individual delivery channels in isolation will limit achievements towards improved nutrition and gender equality. So catalytic progress towards equitable nutrition requires greater collaboration and sharing of assets across domains. So this shifts the visual analogy of delivery from linear silos, where you're doing things like this, to a puzzle where all of the pieces fit into a broader picture of gender equality and empowerment. And you can see in the model there the outer rings of change. I encourage people to take a look at our website. It's www.gendernutritionframework.org. The full framework is there. You can download the full document, and you can unpack this a little bit more and see how the rings interact with one another. I'll pass this over to Saif now, and he can walk us through one of the projects at Plan.
Thank you very much. So hello, everybody. As we've just learned from Merydth World Vision, the importance of strong gender equality framework that is critical for any gender transformative interventions. We'll just get our slides in order, and then I'll explain to you further about Plan International's. Thank you. So at Plan International Canada, next please. So at Plan International Canada, all projects, they operate under a 3-pronged architecture of gender transformative programming and measurement. And these include a result framework, which comprises 3 levels from individual, community to system. and 5 gender equality domains: access and control, roles and responsibilities, decision-making, and gender norms and systems, and then an index for measurement and an accountability tool. We encourage you to follow the link in the chat box. Next, please. So, Plan International's project, Strengthening Health Outcome for Women and Children, which was funded by Global Affairs of Canada, started since 2016, is a gender transformative project that operates in 5 countries in 3 regions, from Caribbean to West Africa and South Asia. In total, the SHOW project reached 4 million women, girls, boys, and men in these 5 countries. Next. So the SHOW project has specific G outcomes and corresponding indicators to build the individual and collective agency of women and girls by building their personal and financial and social assets. These outcomes focused on increased MNCH and SRHR knowledge among women and girls and men, increased decision-making abilities of women and girls, their improved social capital and networks. And if you go to the next one, it'll talk about the indicators which captured increased in their gender equality knowledge in MNCH and SRHR, support provided by male family members, and also percentage of women who are members and leaders of community committees. Similarly, the gender equality outcomes and indicators were also set at the health system level to make health service delivery more gender and adolescent responsive. The outcome focus on the capacity of health service providers to offer gender and adolescent friendly MNCH and SRH services and referrals, as well as strengthening official protocols such as supportive supervisions. The indicators capture percentage of health facilities that offer gender responsive and adolescent friendly services and referrals. If you press next, we'll see the whole range of indicators which come in. Moving on to the next. So gender equality strategy of the SHOW project, it straddles the entire result framework and took an ecological approach. The core activity at center of it is the right holders, which is women of reproductive age, to address their personal and gender-related barriers. And at the second level, to work with men, women, and other sort of power influencers at the household and community level. And the third level operates at the systematic level. Next, please. So at the first level, to build agency of women and girls, several activities were undertaken. For example, establishing women support group, adolescent girls groups to enhance their gender equality and SRHR knowledge, their economic empowerment through savings, their membership and leadership in community health committees, and strengthening of their decision-making and influencing skills. At the second, the male engagement in MNCH and SRHR took place through establishment of fathers group and adolescent boys groups to educate them on gender equality and SRHRs, preparing male gender equality champions, engagement of male and traditional religious leaders to promote positive masculinities and SPCC messaging. In the next third level, you'll see that for gender responsive MNCH and SRHR services, standards were sort of developed on capacity building of health facility staffs and awareness raising of health officials and decision makers to carry out gender equality integration into the service delivery and the referrals. Next, please. Next. So let's look at the results. So in terms of across the SHOW countries, what we noticed are hugely positive results were found at the midline as more health facilities were now providing gender responsive and adolescent friendly MNCH and SRH services. And the next, if you look at it from the midline, what we saw that women's membership and leadership in these community health committees across these countries has increased in many of these countries. And although leadership positions are still sort of enjoyed by men, however, proportion of women in leadership position in many of these countries have increased. So an overwhelming majority of adolescent girls and women and male partners sort of reported that they believe that women should participate in community level decision making. So that's something which is really important, the community level decision making, where women and girls typically not participate. Adolescent girls and women in 4 out of 5 countries share that decisions on household cash are increasingly made jointly with male partners. It's not about only talking about what to cook and whether I feed my child or breastfeed my child. It's about financial decision making. That's where the shift, a gigantic move in power shift or power relations shift that have occurred. Next. Adolescent girls and women report that decisions on family planning are increasingly made jointly with male partners. So I guess earlier when these such decisions were either made only by male husbands or the other family members, but now this shift in the sort of power relationships happen, where we notice that women and adolescent girls are reporting that in these 5 countries that this is happening, they are taking part in decision making. Next. And lastly, the knowledge and type of support that can be provided to pregnant women and girls remain high among male partners. So it's not that men has to take part in the MNCH continuum of care, but also types of support and their roles in participation in care work at home. So knowledge shift types on support it can provide, for example, that whether I'm dropping my wife or girl, adolescent partner at the health facility, or actually taking part a key role in helping it manage it by sharing household chores and responsibilities. So these were the few of the results which we have noticed at the midline. And I'm now pass on to Jen to share her presentation.
Sure. Thanks, Saif. Thanks, Merydth. I think that we've got such a great variety of initiatives here, and they're so different, and it'll be great to chat about some of the ways that they're similar. For my initiative that I've brought to the discussion, some of you may already be familiar with the capacity building, gender equality capacity building training that CanWatch has been working on and has begun to deliver. And this training, really, the central purpose of this training was really to build the confidence and capacity of CanWatch membership based on their preferences and needs to implement, design, measure, and support gender transformative programming. You can go to the next slide, please. So first of all, just to start off, what makes this transformative? Like, why would I bring this forward as a kind of gender transformative initiative? Well, there's a couple of things. One is that we really focused on trying to really bring forward feminist approaches to the design, the delivery, and the content in a couple of ways. So the pedagogical approach was really learner-centered. So again, putting the user and the individual at the center. And building on their experience. It's contextualized, so the whole point of the way the program is designed is for it to be flexible for different organizations in the whole diversity of CanWatch's membership, not just in terms of missions and mandates of members, but also in terms of the participants themselves and the individual identities that they bring to the training, and making sure that they feel that it's been designed for them and can adapt to their specific needs. And then experiential, so really learning by doing. It's a hands-on training with a lot of practice, again, to kind of build that confidence so that every individual participant feels a little bit more like a gender equality expert, as we all are by the time they go. And in terms of feminist principles specifically as well, and this is kind of how feminist approaches really are distinctive, is that there is a shared agenda. So there is a right and wrong in this training. The idea is that our shared agenda is a social justice agenda, and that we're all driving towards the same goal of a more gender equal society. And it really kind of starts off with that kind of shared agreement with participants. It's inclusive and intersectional, so we really work hard on making it a safe space for everybody. And a space that kind of adapts to, respects, includes, and reflects all different participants and their identities and backgrounds. and also meaningful participation. So even though it's a virtual learning experience and that's challenging sometimes, we really made an effort to make it meaningful in terms of having those opportunities for self-reflection and interpersonal exchanges. And then finally, the co-creation of knowledge. So really one of the kind of core feminist principles, whether it's in programming or training, is really to look at a kind of horizontal approach to building knowledge rather than a hierarchical one. And so training really tries to embody that philosophy. You can go to the next slide. So just a bit about the background, how it was developed. It really was over a year, probably 2 years total in the making, in that it started off with a needs assessment and then really was a process of constant engagement with CanWatch members, with sector experts, users themselves, et cetera, really to kind of capture both the expertise and about the expertise, the needs and the preferences. What do members want? What do they need in order to really invigorate their own contribution to gender transformative programming? And there's a list there on the slide of it, just the scope of consultations and those folks that contributed their time, expertise, advice, and their voices to the content. And we can continue. And what does it look like? Okay, so just a snapshot of what the training looks like, so everyone kind of has a sense of what I'm talking about here. It's about 3 full days of engagement, but can be spread out over multiple days. So when we've delivered it in the past, we've done kind of 4 half days, and then 1 week and 2 more half days the next week, kind of thing, splitting it up so it's not too much time and it can be flexible to folks' schedules. But it basically takes a project cycle approach. So we look at first kind of that gender 101, creating a shared vernacular, making sure everybody's on the same page in terms of understanding concepts, definitions, terminology, etc. So we have kind of a shared base there. And then going into problem identification, problem analysis, and elements of gender transformative program design. And then finally ending with module 3, which is around gender transformative and feminist monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning, which in our needs analysis and our kind of constant touch basing with membership was probably the most demanded, like the most interest was in that M&E component. So it's a sizable chunk of the training. You can continue. What is provided? So really, at its essence, this is supposed to be a complete package that can be handed over to CanWatch members so that they can take it and cascade it within their own organizations. So what CanWatch is offering is kind of a training of trainers. So you can attend the training as just for your own benefit, or you can attend it as planning to cascade it within your organization. But we really wanted it to be comprehensive. So it includes an introduction guide with the philosophy, the approach, tips on facilitation, et cetera. It has step-by-step guidance for each session, including the technical guides for how to run the virtual experience at the same time. So it should be really straightforward for users. There's a participant resource package. So those who are joining as participants have everything they need right in front of them. The PowerPoint presentations, and then there's a technology guide that helps with the limited platforms that are used for the program. And finally, the content and design. What did we want to ensure in terms of the content and design? Just a couple of things to note. We really wanted it to reflect sector best practice and take a participatory approach. Lots of opportunity for discussion, lots of opportunity to come at things from different angles. And so every time we've delivered the training, it looks completely different, which I think is part of the beauty of it, hopefully, and what makes it meaningful and relevant for all these diverse members within the CanWatch community. Second, it's designed for facilitators with a medium level of experience. So it's helpful to have some background in terms of gender equality training, but ideally as well, you don't need to have a gender equality advisor at your organization, because often it's a focal point that's taking on these roles, and we really wanted to create a package that could be brought forward by focal points as well, and other members of organizations. And finally, it's designed for the Canadian partnerships. We're really focusing on the Canadian members of CanWatch. However, there are many, many components of it that can be cascaded to partners internationally. And so the idea is to build and provide resources to really promote gender transformative programming, and also that it's delivered and was developed in a way that echoes those feminist principles as well. And that's the training. I can't wait to discuss it more with you guys. Saif, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Jen. That was very helpful. So these are very different pieces of work, but all seek to be sort of a gender transformative. And maybe we could start with some of the similarities in terms of the process of design and development. For example, what steps or processes was taken to ensure that each of these initiatives reflected on gender transformative approach?
Well, I'll go for safe. And I'll have to say that the GTFN is a consortium, and it was not easy to get so many agencies to agree on the architecture of the framework. And one of the things that I think is really important when you're co-creating knowledge and co-creating a design is to really take time. And we did it. Took over a year, as I mentioned, to do research, and that was then followed by the development of this the framework, lots of debate and discussion on the vision, but also what you know, how is this going to actually be used? Who's going to be using it? And every agency had time and space to input, and the process, I would say, was very collaborative. But you know, at the same time, we still need field validation. We haven't yet validated this at the field level. And one of the things that I would like to say that I think is important is that this is a model that's not just for resource constrained settings, but it's also a framework that can be used also in a Canadian setting or another industrialized country setting. You know, it's important that no matter where you are geographically, we need to acknowledge the importance of agencies, resources, and opportunity structures for women and girls around the world. And you know, this is not just you know, this isn't just for women and girls specifically. I think we can also look at it for men and the issues that men and boys are facing in different contexts as well, and their ability to access health services for themselves. So I think it's a really flexible framework, and something that I think is going to need some more time to you know, to look at, and to the more steps involved in its evolution. A funny anecdote that I thought would be kind of fun to share is when we were looking at the definition of gender norms, we just went back and forth for an entire afternoon, all the different gender advisors and specialists on this consortium, looking at what we meant by various, you know, terminologies and wording and the nuance of what we mean by gender norms, until we came up with something that everybody was really happy with. But it's certainly dynamic, and it's not something that is, I believe it will evolve as time goes on, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, Merydth, that's funny that you ended with the terminology there, because I think, you know, and you and I have gone through this so much with, in terms of the work on the CanWatch Gender Equality Working Group, where these really deep discussions around how do we define this? What's our shared understanding of what this term means? And in terms of the development, the design of the training, that was really the starting point as well a couple of years ago, was, you know, everyone within the membership, and especially in the Gender Equality Working Group, really asking for resources and materials, capacity building opportunities to really understand and arrive at a shared understanding of what do we mean by transformative? What do we mean by aware? You know, what do we mean by feminist approaches? And I think one of the things that we realized after all of these discussions and going into the design of the content of this training was that if we're going to really arrive at a shared understanding of these terms, it was really more about the shared understanding of the meaning behind the terms, right? Of the change that we're seeking. And that we all, like all these organizations and all the members, kind of have slightly different, they use slightly different scales and slightly different terminologies, and we see that around the world. But really what we want to do is have a shared understanding of the kind of change, social change we want to see. Like, how do we understand the change we're striving for? So we spent a lot of time in the development of this training just talking to different members, and having these really great conversations. And there are a couple of conferences that you and I kind of worked on presentations together around understanding this change. And so what we arrived at in the development of the content of the training was really focusing on that conceptual understanding. So we spend a lot of time talking about and unpacking and thinking of examples of what we mean by transformative in terms of things like the difference between condition and position, and how that can help us to understand the role of power in gender transformative change, right? And when we unpack all those concepts, everyone walks away with this much deeper understanding, regardless of the terminology your organization uses, right? So it becomes kind of a part of your conceptual vernacular rather than your verbal vernacular, for lack of a better term. But yeah, so that was in the development. I think that we found all of those consultations really led us to take a kind of a different approach to that terminology than some other trainings that perhaps I've done, where we really wanted to say, like, what's your deep understanding? Yeah. Oh, Saif, you're muted again.
Yeah, sorry, technology. Thank you very much again. This is very helpful. And when I look back at, for example, how plan sort of designing of this whole show program, which was functioning operational across 5 countries, and what steps and processes which were undertaken. So like any other project or plan at the design stage, we endeavor to understand the nature, extent, root causes of gender inequalities and its impact on the health of, in this case, for example, the women. So access to information and services, participation at the household and community level, decision-making, and contextual sort of power relations around gender-based violence and, child early forced marriages. So the question is how to collect this information and design a gender equality strategy. So extensive co-creation. Evidence was collected through several community consultations, which were organized with women, girls, men and boys, and the community influencers. And also health staff or health professionals across these 5 countries. And based on the data, the gender-specific and gender sort of mainstream outcomes and indicators were sort of articulated. A multi-dimensional gender equality strategy was designed to address the individual and sort of community and systemic gender-related challenges. And at the design stage, the gender equality strategy activities were sort of contextualized for maximum impact and relevance, because this project was operational in so many diverse sort of countries. So the contextualization was very, very important. Secondly, sort of the in-depth gender equality assessment. Soon, when the project was sort of went into effect, a detailed gender assessment was carried out across all these countries and target locations, following our baseline. And the project gender equality strategy was validated and further contextualized for each of the countries. And these assessments or gender equality assessments were carried out with extensive consultation with the target women and girls and men and boys beneficiaries. So nature of activities is another important area and need to keep in mind when we're designing a step-in process. The key element of the strategy was to ensure that gender equality action addressed gender power relationships through deep dive, extended, and sort of reflective interventions, rather than sort of one-off education type of actions. And that is a key for any gender transformative approach, the intensity of the intervention and the content of the approach. So these are the important elements for any steps in process as we're designing sort of a program which is gender transformative.
Yeah, thanks, Saif. I think one of the things I noted too is like all of our experiences in terms of the design and planning is that a lot of time needs to be invested, right, in order to really generate that kind of knowledge and opportunity for co-creation that really needs to be at the foundation of transformative programming. Yeah, and there's another similar thread kind of that I noticed in these pieces of work that each of us are kind of bringing to the table, and that's that I can see that the individual is at the center of all of them, right? Like this is such a strong common thread in all of these really different pieces that are transformative. And I just wanted for us each to have a chance to kind of share why that's so important, and what this kind of looks like in these different initiatives, how that translates to your initiative.
Let me respond to this, and maybe we can first watch a short video, and then I'll sort of respond to this question. This video also makes it clear. So any gender transformative sort of program, by definition, has to be a right-based, which means that they are designed so the right holders, who are individuals, can demand, exercise, and realize their rights. So in the case of SHOW, it's health and specifically reproductive health rights is what we're talking about. So for an individual, as Janjuwe rightly mentioned, at the center of this any programming, and for that individual to be able to realize their rights, 3 conditions must be met. First is the right holders, in the case of SHOW, which is the women of reproductive age, individually and collectively must be able to make informed choices and act on those choices as well and demand their rights. So requiring extensive individual and collective agency building. Thus, the focus of empowerment activities are on individual women and girls through education, capacity building, network building, economic empowerment, and so on and so forth. Second, for the right holders to be able to exercise their agency and demand their right, a conducive social environment or social capital for women and girls has to be created. And this again means working with individual and collective of moral duty bearers and power holders in families and communities as they are seeking to change sort of entrenched attitudes and behaviors and inequitable relationship between individuals. So example from SHOW, for example, include our male engagement work with fathers, boys, and religious leaders. In all the 5 countries, father clubs were formed and where groups were engaged. Focus was on, even the groups were engaged, focus was on the men, on individual gender transformative change. In Nigeria, for example, the engagement of religious leaders to engage men in MNCH and GE work was carried out. And third level, finally, the individual right holders, to be able to realize their rights, system, process, and services need to be responsive and to the individual gender and other interpersonal, intersectional sort of needs. Thus, all health services and the health service providers and the sort of decision makers. So their capacity building was very much central as part of this program to shift their attitudes and behaviors toward more gender and adolescent sort of responsive service delivery coupled with the systemic changes.
Thanks, Saif. You know, I have much more experience myself personally in programming than I do in developing conceptual frameworks. But I really did enjoy working on this particular piece because it applied a women's empowerment theory to nutrition programming and putting women and girls at the center of the process. And that's something that, you know, we all do intuitively. It's part of what we do regularly in our work, but to kind of get into that literature and really unpack what things, you know, conceptual frameworks that people like Kabir and Malhotra and Batiwala and others have come up with was really, really interesting. And the idea that the GTFN, the Gender Transformative Framework for Nutrition, is that it's building around those central components of agency, resources, and opportunity and structure to reinforce and to build on each other in order to facilitate empowerment. And so leaving out one component means that you're leaving out an essential ingredient, and then the whole doesn't work. And in fact, if you look at the picture of it, there it's actually gears, and if you leave one out, the wheel won't turn. So I think that what's important in this framework and what's truly innovative is that it looks at those core variables and how they interact across many areas of life, no matter what. So, for example, areas like food and health and wash and education, etc., and that changes in empowerment in one area affect the whole ecosystem. It's complex, it's adaptive, it's not linear, because that's what women and girls have said that they need, and that's what life is like. Life is not, you don't just go in a straight line. There's many things that impact on our ability to get from point A to point B, and that's what empowerment looks like. So the framework takes very much an intersectional approach, human rights-based approach. Being empowered in one domain of your life can have knock-on effects, both positive and negative, on others. And so, for example, being economically empowered by earning and controlling your own income might allow you to be able to purchase more food for yourself and your family and your children, but it also might lead to more increased conflict and increased risk of interpartner violence. So these are ways in which the framework looks at how all of those aspects interact together, and tries to start addressing some of those.
Yeah, and I like the way that's like all of those components work. It's a really, the gears are a very kind of great metaphor for really understanding how we put together those ideas around these really complex intersecting elements, right? And for us, for the training, it just really became more and more clear that had to be such a central driving kind of message throughout the training, was the individual at the center for so many reasons. One is, taking a socio-ecological approach has long kind of been seen as kind of best practice, but it's also, if you're taking a rights-based approach genuinely, we just felt it has to be, the individual has to be at the center, right? So for example, I think many, and we talk a lot about this in the training, we're all very familiar with gender equality and transformative change being kind of positioned or offered as an instrumental and an instrumentalist kind of approach, which is to say, empower women and provide opportunities for increased agency in order to grow the economy, or in order to achieve this, or in order to achieve that. Whereas what we really wanted to put forward in this training is the intrinsic value and the human right of gender equality. So that social justice and social change is actually a basic right first, and then it also has all of these community level and development benefits, right? And so for us, we kind of really saw how just completely essential it is that the individual is at the center and is the driving force behind the programs that seek transformative change. And one of the things that I think, we talk a lot, obviously, about health programming in the training, although the idea can be applied to many different sectors, and we've talked about this too quite a few times, and Saif and Merydth is also within the Gender Equality Working Group, but just this idea that if we put human rights at the kind of impact level, right? If we're looking at human rights and a rights-based approach and empowerment being part of that ultimate outcome, not just the sector outcome, so not just, increased nutrition or reduction in maternal mortality. If we're looking at empowerment and realization of rights at the top, we're ensuring that programming focuses on agency as well. So all throughout the training, we really kind of, it really links together, and then bringing a feminist approach, it just fits right into that as well, right? So it's interesting how similar, even in these different pieces, that like our three initiatives really have that strong kind of approach in common.
I like, Jen, how you raise the challenge of how we measure women and girls empowerment. So I'm interested in reflecting on that myself, but I'm wondering, all of these are transformative efforts, and they all have challenges associated with them. And I'm wondering, what are some of the challenges that we might share together? I want to build on something that you said there, Jen, but I'll let you build on what you've already said in looking at and how this has been received.
Sure. Well, so aside from COVID-19, one of the biggest challenges, and adapting what we had originally anticipated as a face-to-face training into a virtual experience. Aside from that, like going back to kind of, what are the transformative elements that also kind of present a challenge? I think for us, one of the big things is because I think there's a tendency for folks to want a formula. Like, so when there's a capacity building effort, or when there's, go to a training, it's like, just tell me what to do. Tell me how to do this, how to design. And the thing is about transformative change is that because it's so complex, as you both have just been talking about, there isn't a formula, right? It's really about building critical thinking skills and the application of that lens for understanding these complexities. That a transformative response can be designed. And so one of the challenges, I think, is just initially overcoming that hurdle of there being some kind of one way or formula, or a step-by-step solution that generates transformative change. So kind of overcoming that. And then also the second challenge, I would say probably, is that I think a lot of folks feel comfortable with or are quite familiar with already integrating gender sensitive approaches into their work, but feel somehow that transformative approaches or approaches that more intensely integrate gender equality are somehow, there needs to be some kind of expertise or some kind of, a consultant or something that some kind of external expertise that's brought in. And really, we really wanted through this training program to make everybody feel that sense of confidence and ownership over social change in their programming and in their work. So kind of the challenge, I guess, as well, was to overcome, I think, what some people feel is kind of a bit overwhelming or intimidating, which is this idea of really striving for gender transformative programming, and everyone, whether you're in communications or finance or programming or whatever your area is, or research, that you also are a gender equality expert. And that was the kind of challenge that we put ourselves to kind of generate that level of confidence amongst participants, that they could go and really achieve the change, whatever change they had space to achieve within their own work.
Yeah. Merydth, it's very interesting question. Excuse me. To reflect upon sort of the challenges of implementing a gender transformative program. But what we have seen, for example, writ large, is the articulated policy commitment by funders is not really matched with a financial commitment to gender equality. And nor there is enough understanding that gender transformative change requires long-term, flexible, and feminist co-created approaches, rather than, I would say, the current paradigm of risk-averse programming with set results, relatively short duration, and strict compliance requirements. And with that, so there's a very little space for any flexibility or agility. At another level, for example, often gender equality is seen as an add-on to a sector program, such as a health program, as opposed to a necessary outcome in and of itself, and the core pathways to sort of optimal sector results. Meaning that often when budget cuts are to be made, for example, invariably they will be on the GE activities. So that's sort of another sort of a challenge in that way. Similarly, on the ground, when you start implementing these gender transformative programs in sort of in different countries, the investment required for local partners and grassroots WROs, women rights organizations, and youth-led organizations is not really there. And what Jen talked about in terms of this training to build that capacity to implement gender transformative program, understand and then implement is so vital. So partners are seen as, for example, implementers, delivering project as opposed to the real owners and sort of drivers of sustainable contextual changes. Capacity support to these partners is often in the shape of a couple of sort of training rather than institutional strengthening in the long term towards quality gender transformative programming environments. And lastly, but also very frequently, local and national governments' capacity on gender equality is weak. The policy commitment is mostly there, which is great, but the wherewithal to implement policy and plan is not there. And national gender equality so that machineries such as, for example, ministries or departments, etc., are more often than not are underfunded or sidelined, and getting sort of them on board, core actors, can be a challenge. So that if they are sort of your key player, who are like a ministries of gender, for example, or social welfare, and they are sort of forms the machinery, women machinery to implement the program, and they are key players, but if they are not the key players, that itself become a challenge. So several challenges from in different levels that one could experience, and it's a constant sort of effort.
Yeah, you've both mentioned in different ways this challenge of using other things, particularly metrics related to health outcomes, as proxies for empowerment. And I feel that one of the challenges for us as experts and specialists in gender equality is to create space in different sectors to examine how gender norms are interacting with those spaces, and to try and unpack that better. There's an assumption, I think, that everyone agrees on how to approach this, but that frequently means shifting what we've all acknowledged is an excellent approach, which is that socio-ecological model, into something very linear, where there's an end at the end of the whole thing. And that doesn't always transfer. And certainly when we're talking about empowerment, empowerment is not a linear experience for people. So, in the nutrition sector, we've historically evaluated success on numerical metrics and the direct outcome of specific interventions. So, for example, we give iron to pregnant women to prevent premature birth, among other things. But we've not done a good job of communicating the bigger impact of iron supplementation. And as a consortium, we really felt the need to move beyond a linear perspective. And I mentioned that earlier, that the linear frameworks didn't work for us. And in looking at iron, for example, of what the iron supplement does, and an instrumentalist view of women, to a place where we acknowledge the whole ecosystem and the intersecting realities that woman is facing, and begin to measure her ability to engage with multiple sectors so that she does not risk anemia in the first place. And one of the things that the framework talks about is that you can't empower someone else. People empower themselves, and they begin to acknowledge that they have agency to act and they have agency to move. And it's about sort of creating the space in order to see these things happen. I remember one of the panel speakers at Women Deliver countering back, and I don't want to say who the person was. She was counting back against a gentleman they were from different places in the world, and she said, "I don't need you to empower me. I need you to amplify my voice," or "I don't need you to give me voice. I need you to amplify my voice." And that just stuck with me, and I think that that's really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to amplify the experience of women and girls in accessing in this case for the GTFN and accessing nutrition, but in looking at all of the different barriers and all of the different places that they're engaging on a daily basis, and trying to understand how those spaces are impacting on that woman's ability to, let's say in the case of iron, access that iron. And and I think there's multiple challenges to this. In addition to what I've mentioned, is frequently the donor assumption that well, let's measure how many doses of iron were delivered, for example, or and I think we need to work with Global Affairs Canada and with other donors to really look at how we can address this differently.
Great. This was such a wonderful discussion and conversation. Thank you, Merydth and Jen, for this great discussion. I guess in short time, we have covered a lot, from a conceptual model of transformative nutritional programming to which Merydth you presented, a gender transformative 5-country health program, and also a virtual capacity building program on gender equality. I hope everyone found this session as helpful and engaging as we did. With that, from all three of us, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Everybody.